Welcome back to Esoteric Hollywood. If you recall, we were discussing last time Quantum of Solace. I titled my piece Quantum of Solace 007's Alchemy. So we're going to finish that piece, and then we're going to get to Skyfall as we make our way towards Spectre. So Spectre will be up soon. But if we recall, I was getting into the alchemical notions that are quite obvious and blatant throughout the previous incarnations of Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and then, as we'll see, Skyfall as well. But we've talked about the betrayal on the part of Vesper Lind, what creates Bond to be the assassin that he is. We've talked about Mr. White, who he's followed in Jungian lingo, this being the calcination stage, the whiteness stage of alchemy, where the shadows are realized and the confrontation with inflated egos are purified. We've discussed Bond losing White and being bent on revenge for those connected to Vesper and her betrayal. Whiteness is also the stage, according to Jung, where the anima and the animus and the anima work towards harmony. That is, the male and the female principles. Now, so all of that we've dealt with, and as we finish with Quantum of Solace, we're going to pick back up with the notion that Quantum, this secret organization, is spoken of as everywhere, including inside British intelligence. Quantum is this shadowy international cabal that uses corporate fronts. And in fact, as we said many times, it's almost like Spectre. And I'm not going to reveal too much, but we'll discuss that when we get to Spectre. But in terms of reality, Quantum as an organization bears a striking resemblance to the real International Intelligence Agency, the real get-the-job-done private operation that's described by Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty in his book, The Secret Team. The Secret Team actually functioned as a kind of corporate intelligence for hire squad that did whatever needed to be done. And this is precisely what Quantum is. Quantum is itself both team and corporation. Dominic Green runs the organization as a front for which uses the front of the green movement. So here we've moved from white to green in alchemy, right? Green, even at one point in the film, blames government regulation as the problem, and that privatization is the only way out, while government impedes progress. Green, we see, is an apostle for not only libertarian-ish ethics, but also the green movement, a kind of Reagan-Thatcherite deregulation proponent, the fetish of deregulation, the fetish of markets. Green also claims to support environmental causes, right, for the good of the earth, and we think of someone like Al Gore, or the fact that the green movement itself actually arose out of sort of both Nazi and Marxist circles. There's actual old works that you can find of Marx and Engels discussing man's alienation from nature, and that you get the idea that they're really setting the stage for the coming green movement, which would be really would come to the fore in the 70s with certain think tanks and groups like the Club of Rome that would put together policies on organizing the quote revolution of the future, right? So these are completely corporate, completely think tank created fake revolutions, the Green Revolution, which they call in their papers originally in the 70s limits to growth, and then in the 90s the first global revolution. Right, they describe it as the first anti-human revolution because humanity is viewed as a cancer, as a disease on Mother Earth, and sweet green Gaia, Mother Earth, has to be purged of humans to, quote, be in balance, to stop growth. And this is why it would connect into things like Fabianism, Nazism, fascism, right? Where you have the complete control of the centralized state, which will then regulate not just the marketplace, but also the marketplace of humans. Humans are then a resource to be culled and herded and kept in, quote, balance. That would also lead to the logical conclusion of euthanasia. All right, so abortion, population control, euthanasia, all of these run together. Now, this is exactly what Dominic Green is after in Quantum of Solace, and it's very surprising to me that this is the plot of this film. I was kind of shocked to see that, but you know, it's good at the same time, right? So we got into the fact that Green sort of co-opted this president of Bolivia. I apologize. This turn of the season, my allergies have just gone crazy, so you're going to hear me snorting and sniffing here. I can't help it because it's November, baby. So Green has co-opted this Bolivian president, Medrano, and what we get from this is that this new military junta in Bolivia is run by Green, a private corporate military junta that will put into place deregulation, allowing Green to co-opt the natural resources. That's really what Green's after in this game. And we learn from Bond and M that the CIA and British intelligence have actually signed on to support Green in this, to their dismay. Now, if we think about, I mentioned as well this Masonic illuminist sort of play, La Tosca, this opera that's being shown as Bond and Green are kind of lurking around and scoping each other out. And I noted that this play, this opera, is actually based on Freemasonic illuminist revolutionary thought, which is an Italian sect that was prominent in the 1800s called the Carbonari. Now, this is significant because the symbology of the play is similar to the symbology of the Carbonari, right? Which the all-seeing eye, and then the church being inside the eye signifies the co-opting of the Roman Catholic Church and many other churches by the Masonic establishment. And I mentioned the Alta Vendita Lodge, and that document that was actually discovered by Pope Leo XIII, the documents of the Alta Vendita P2 Lodge, which planned to co-opt the papacy. Now, the film is telling us that the same ideals are at work in the removal of the vestiges of the old order, the ancient regime, and the establishment of a world republic. But the new world republic has morphed into something new itself. Now it's a kind of international, corporate, global environmentalist control grid, right? It's run by rogue private intelligence bees that buzz about and secret teams that co-opt the old institutions, such as the nation state, Medrano, or the Church of Rome, as in the play and the film. It's the Reich, but mixed with the Fabian socialist model, with a new twist of techno-elitism. In fact, when Bond identifies the members of Quantum at the opera, he is able to send grainy photos back to MI6, if you recall, which instantly has files on each one of these people. So here's your Panopticon Surveillance Society, right? This is the meaning of the I here is quite obvious. It's the Total Information Awareness. It's NSA. It's GCHQ, right? Now, Bond had also, earlier in the film, gone to Hotel Dessalines, which is a Port-au-Prince hotel named after the black anti-colonialist revolutionary Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So there's 2 references to revolutionaries in this film so far. And there's also several images of swastikas. But swastikas are supposed to be right-wing, and revolutionaries are supposed to be left-wing, right? How can that work? How can that be the case with all this from the symbology? Well, that's because it's a dialectic. And it's elites that manipulate both sides of this dialectic. Now, M has taken her suspicions to the office of the Prime Minister concerning the machinations of Green, but it's important to point out that quantum is very much in bed with the Prime Minister, right? So Dominic Green's quantum is not just co-opted a few governments. He's actually in bed with the elites of the Anglo-American Atlanticist establishment. And we could probably look at something like BP or Shell, right? This could be comparable to Dominic Green's operation, because those international corporate entities will buy off governments. Now, the Prime Minister tells M that the natural resources of the world are running out. The dollar is collapsing, he says. So we're going to supposedly lose the world reserve currency because there's just not enough resources to go around. But what we find out is that the resources are being gained. Each of these things are being engineered in the film and in reality. The eventual move away from the dollar, I'm saying. And that's what you are openly being told. In fact, that too is the deeper process we're working through the second half of Quantum of Solace. If you heard the radio show from a few nights ago, we did Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace. And we didn't get to the end of Quantum of Solace, so I've picked back up, and we're dealing with that. And then we're going to do Skyfall as we work our way towards Spectre, which premiered this past weekend. Now, I was telling you that the resource war was manipulated and engineered. The film shows us this. I was showing you that the illuminist play in the film is there for a reason, because it shows the control of both sides of a dialectic, of the right and the left. And the eye that figures so prominently throughout this is telling you that it's the eye that looks at both sides, right? It's the eye that sees all. You're watching this with your eye, while simultaneously in reality, the very eyes that are watching you and surveilling you, you are completely unaware of. So Bond eyes the members of the, quote, Illuminati, Green, and sends digital eyes to the home office of MI6. Aye, Captain. So the meta-narrative enters the picture to show you the complexity of the meaning in this film as it blends with reality. And I wrote a piece on this as well, talking about how Spectre is real. Now, I'm going to get to some of that, because I think that's really interesting when we look at the film Spectre, because we're going to see that, as I said, Spectre is a real organization, right? I mean, in the sense, it may not be called Spectre, but I'm saying it shares all the features of Spectre. And in my piece, I wrote, it's called "The Establishment Shadow Government is Spectre." I wrote this a year ago, actually, November 6, 2014. It's now November 2015. So I was quite elated to see that the title of the new Bond film will actually be Spectre. So maybe the writers were reading Jay's analysis at that time. I'm kidding. I don't really think that, but maybe, who knows? Now, not only we get back to Bond here in Quantum of Solace, when he's at that the hotel. This is the Port-au-Prince Hotel, I think. Yeah, it's the Andean Grand Hotel, and there's swastikas everywhere in this hotel. Now, not only is Bond struggling through his alchemical transformation, the viewer is targeted for this process as well. This film reveals the entirety of the globalists' plan the oligarch plan through fictional narratives and shows you how the world is actually run. It's gamed. And it has the effect of putting a spell on you. It's predictive programming. You are now mesmerized and you cannot believe that these things really exist. I saw it in a Bond movie. Yet every day in our face, right? Hundreds of examples of just massive corporate green scams. Climate change. Agenda 21. And ultimately, they claim to be the justification for why everybody needs to die. So, back to the narrative. Green discovers that Bond is onto him, and he sends a message by dipping a drowning agent, dipping and drowning an agent named Strawberry Fields into oil. Now, that's, of course, the Beatles song, and that's interesting because that probably has reference to LSD, right? And LSD, the Beatles had this intimate, strange connection with British intelligence, if you know the deeper, darker side of the Beatles. They also had meetings with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. They were instrumental in helping bring the Far Eastern invasion over to the U.S. through the so-called British invasion. Now, this was all psychological warfare. It was social engineering. Tavistock Institute. Tavistock Institute is the across the pond equivalent to the Stanford Research Institute. It's the equivalent to Pratt House and right, all these British institutions that have their mirror in the U.S. with the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. All these things are connected. They're not separate entities. And they exist to reorganize and re-engineer society, right? Everything from the think tanks to the planners to the managers and so forth. And fiction is a big part of this because fiction has to craft things in the direction that they want things to go, because that's how, as I've said many times, most people get their information. So Strawberry Fields is drowned in oil. That could be significant because oil companies are very powerful. They do have a large lobbying effect. They're some of the most powerful corporations in the world. And while many people think that they're in competition with the green movement, that's actually completely bullshit. It's BP, Shell, right, that actually fund most of the green movement. So they are big time funders of the green movement. Why? Why would that be? Well, if you think about it, it's pretty obvious, right? We've been talking about gaming the system in this film. Quanta, gaming and controlling matter. Quantification. What's the best way to game and control markets and resources? Well, to get the government to pass a law, and then the government shock troops and jackbooted thugs will support your company, right? So if Monsanto lobbies to get something passed legally that only their seed can be used, then the government's now behind Monsanto. If BP or Shell gets a regulation passed that only their chemical can be used and all others are, say, toxic because they aren't green, well, then you've shut down all your competition. That's how it works. Bond realizes then that MI6 and Bond and M, they think that Bond goes rogue eventually. This always happens, right? Bond's always pissy and upset. He's gone rogue. And they think Green wants oil. Like he's just a greedy oil guy. But this is showing that level of deception that I'm getting at. So it's not ultimately just about oil. It's about gaming full spectrum dominance in all areas of life. Bond realizes that he's after the resources, not just oil. But let's look back to alchemy, because the scene of the strawberry fields being dipped in oil brings to mind the classic Bond image from Goldfinger, where one of the Bond girls was dipped in gold as a method of execution, right? So that's another alchemical image. And what is the end result of alchemy, right? As we said, to produce gold from base metals or the philosopher's stone. And it's Bond that is going to be through the refiner's fire, And he's still in process of transformation, though. So the Negredo stage, right, of the chick dipped in oil black, has returned once again for purification. There has yet to be yet another female sacrifice. Right, so Bond is just not going to be able to be into any chick at all. Anyone he likes ends up dead. It should also be noted too that the entire hotel here that's created, the Andean Grand, is fake. It's full of large G's. That is the Masonic G for Gnosis, or Great Architect. And the Andean also has Masonic checkered floorboard. So the hotel then kind of takes on the symbology of a lodge, right, with the floorboard and the G. There's also pyramids placed throughout the hotel. And this black and white here is symbolic of the duality, right, through Masonry and Far Eastern religions, that pretty much through all things, that there's an ontological necessity to evil. Evil is thought of in this view to be just the flip side of good, and evil and good are viewed as mutually dependent on one another. And this schema is even applied then to geopolitics and psychological warfare, where dialectical opposites are actually managed by a higher power that has an intimate knowledge of both sides, right? And this is why I think so many people are under mind control, and they're subjected to doublethink. And it's because it's a system designed to control through confusion. For example, let's say incredulous Persians, for example, will find all this to be poppycock, right? To be absurd, all the stuff I'm saying, for the simple reason that those in the echelons of power would never purposely reveal to the world the way they work, right? No, that's because you don't understand. That's precisely why it's done. And Dominic Green makes this controlled opposition clear in the film. He responds to the angry Bolivian leader Medrano about signing on to Quantum's control of resources. Green says, "You should know something about the people that I work with. We deal with the left or the right, dictators or liberators." There you go. That says it all. And that says everything that I'm trying to explain, right? You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood every Tuesday to Friday, 8 p.m. installments of 007. And I was just telling you about Dominic Green's quote, right? "You should know something about the people that I work with. We deal with the left or the right, the dictators or the liberators," right? So you can think of it as a brain, right? The brain has a right eye and a left eye, right? The brain uses both. So the brain is like Spectre or Quantum, this international shadowy organization. And they don't care if you're a dictator or a liberator in some tin-pot country or in some Democratic or Republican race. They want to use the right or the left, whatever suits their ends. And that's how it's done. It's this Nietzschean approach of being beyond good and evil, of working with whatever paradigms and worldviews are necessary to get the job done. And this is beyond the one-dimensional thinking of most people. Good guy, bad guy. Right? Green tells Medrano that if he refuses to sign on to Quantum's control of resources, Quantum will simply topple his dictatorship and install somebody who will. Does this sound familiar? Well, it sounds like CIA and MI6 operations throughout the last 60, 70, 80 years. That's what it sounds like. From Egypt to South America to Latin America to Africa to Ukraine to Russia to Europe to Gladio. The list never ends. So I would like to add, though, if you like the intro song that you heard for Esoteric Hollywood, that is Dream Agent by Ariel Electron, Holig Spies, and Thierry Gauthier. You can find that on the Kore Cosmu album. That's K-O-R-E K-O-U-S-M-E. Wait, K-O-R-E, Kore K-O-S-M-O-U. Yeah, Greek spelling there. Now, I would also point out that if you're looking for organic supplements. Now, who doesn't? I mean, I saw a bunch of fat kids today eating candy, and it was all the candy that, I think when I was a kid, it was still actually sugar, which sugar itself is probably not that good to be chomping on all the time, especially if you're a kid. But now it's not even sugar, it's all high fructose corn syrup, right? It's gross, it's nasty, it's fake. It comes out of a lab, like guys in white lab coats making candy in beakers and test tubes, right? I don't know, that's not candy. I don't know what that is. That's like, it's plastic. So you don't want to eat that crap. You don't want your kids eating that crap. Gushers, Squeeze-Its, Lick-O-Made, Fun Dip. What is this stuff? What is this? It's not food. This is not edible stuff. Don't put this in your mouth. But if you could actually transition into, organic versions of all that, right? I'm not just talking about candy. I'm talking about food in general. And there's all kinds of, nutritional supplements. We're so deficient in minerals, vitamins, that, you really need supplements. You really need to tack these onto your diet so that you get what you need, because the food, the soil, these things are beginning to be depleted in natural minerals and so forth. So you can go to j.talknetwork.com to find all that you need in that vein, right? I've tried these products; they're excellent, and I can't recommend them enough. And Mike Adams of Natural News has, put together just an excellent, easy access store there that you can order whatever you need, especially as we get near the holiday season. So remember, j.talknetwork.com, and also remember that you're listening on talknetwork.com, which is the only completely corporate-free and libertarian, I guess you could say, for most of the hosts, geared radio that is not controlled by dictates of agents and dictates of government stooges and the dictates of propaganda, social engineers, or the Ministry of Truth, or the Ministry of Culture, all the different 1984 things. We can pretty much say what we want. So if you like that and you want to keep hearing that kind of talk radio, then, we're listener supported. So the way that you do that is through j.talknetwork.com. Get your supplements there. Stop getting your supplements at Walmart. Stop getting them at Walgreens, where they promote vaccines and vaccinations. Go through Natural News. Go through j.talknetwork.com. And check out jaysanalysis.com. I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles. If you like to read, then you're going to want to read Jay's Analysis, because I talk about everything from film to philosophy to geopolitics to theology to esoterica. You name it. There's comedy, there's satire, there's improvisation. Hundreds and hundreds. There's 780 posts now, I think, somewhere in there, 770. And 100 film reviews. All kinds of stuff that you're hearing here on Esoteric Hollywood, as well as my forthcoming book. I will have a book coming out in the spring through Trine Day Publishers, which will be titled Esoteric Hollywood. Can you believe that? Same title. Makes it easy for you. So look for that. Be sure to get a copy. I think Mike's going to carry that in the bookstore, National News Bookstore. So on top of that, I also offer philosophy courses. If you want to get an education, right, in classically minded education, right, that focuses on the heritage of Western civilization, that's not tainted and destroyed by social justice warriors, PC brigades, PC monsters, goblins, Sasquatches, and gorillas that inhabit the local state universities, who are going to tell you that Shakespeare's about Karl Marx, and that Plato is about Plato is, well, they're only going to talk about sex in Plato or something like that, right? They're not going to tell you about Plato's metaphysics. But what I offer at Jay's Analysis is philosophy lectures. So philosophy lectures that are not bothered by social convention, social engineering, social conventions that are newly upon us, right? Where we have to be PC. We can't talk about anything unless I don't know who it is exactly that decides what the new PC laws are each day. All these internet warriors and the people at Madison Avenue and so forth. But anyway, if you'd like to get an education in philosophy, we are working our way through Plato's Republic, and I have lectures on quite a few of Plato's dialogues, and you can sign up for that at jaysanalysis.com. You'll see the tab there for the subscription. So back to Esoteric Hollywood here with Quantum of Solace. We were talking about how Dominic Green works with either side, and Bond is having to go through the refiner's fire yet again and have all of his attachments purged. And Bond's been on the revenge trail, struggling with his own inner demons as usual. He's worried, will he end up getting his new interest, Camille? He now likes this new Bond babe, Camille. Will she end up dead? Camille, too, is after revenge against Medrano. And Olga Kurylenko, by the way, is pretty hot. Medrano burned her family to death when she was a child. And Bond tells her how to cope after you kill somebody. This is after a lengthy battle at the Eco Hotel. Right? Bond captures Green, and then Camille gets her revenge. However, when Camille actually does kill Medrano, or the fire that's ignited in this so-called Eco Hotel, this smart hotel, sustainability hotel, the Agenda 21 Hotel, causes her to have a flashback, and she breaks down, she dissociates, right, following upon her assassination. Now, this occurs during a massive fire. Now, the name Camille, it means an altar server or an acolyte. And so we can surmise that Bond is bringing Camille through the same transformational process as his acolyte, right? And Bond himself undergoes this transformation due to his justified issues with the feminine side of the gender spectrum. And back to Jungian thought, psychoanalysis, it's the spinal stage, right, that we reach, the Rubidoux Stage, which is the red-orange stage of alchemy, where the subject has achieved inner harmony and individuation. So after eliminating Green, Camille says, "I wish I could set you free, but the prison is in your mind." This lets us know that the journey that Bond has been on all along is in his own psyche. This will become very clear by the time that we reach Spectre. We end the film then with Bond tracking down the man responsible for Vesper Lynd's death, and we notice that the Canadian intelligence agent that is with him has the necklace that Vesper had. And wouldn't you know, it's a swastika. Why all the swastikas? As we said, because the control of left and right is in the power of the eye, or the mind behind those left and right eyes. And this is the same eye we see on the dollar bill, the all-seeing eye, right? What does that mean? It's the all-seeing eye that this occult society, Spectre, Quantum, they operate behind the scenes, and they control the money system, the bankers and so forth, which allows them to control either leftist or rightist movements, because they control the funding of the left and right movements. Is the way our world system is set up, you can't do much as a leftist or a rightist or whatever your petty cause is without funding, without the monetary fiat banking system. Like it or not, you need that to do a whole lot as things are in the present scheme. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. We're talking Quantum of Solace, and I was just closing, explaining how leftist and rightist parties, factions, governments, movements, revolutions, dictators, they don't get very far without money backing them and arms. And if you've got the money and the arms can be bought through money, then you can control the movements. And that's how it works, right? So you're beholden to those who control the purse strings. If you're a king, if you're a revolutionary, a monarch, a leader, a leftist, a rightist, a Democrat, a Republican, or a libertarian. So that's the message of Quantum of Solace. Because the left and the right is controlled by the brain that looks through the left and the right eyes. We could think of it that way. We think of a pyramid having 4 faces, right? 4 sides. If we have a 4-sided pyramid, for example. At the top is an eye. At the top is a capstone. And it can see all 4 sides of the spectrum. Left, right, left of right, and right of center, right? It can see all 4 possibilities. And the money system, right, is what controls how far your political campaign goes. Your funders, your PAC, CPAC, so forth and so on. And this is how the system runs. This is how the elite run things. Or left, it's both. It's like a chemist in a lab using different chemicals to concoct a new synthesis, to use that alchemical and chemistry analogy. As Green said, you should know something about us, quantum. We work with the right or the left, dictators or liberators. And as such, alchemically, the union and synthesis of these dualities mirrors the process of the inner transformation that Carl Jung thought he discovered, which was really just an acceptance of Gnosticism in some form or fashion, as Carl Jung himself said many times. And so, read in this way, Quantum of Solace, which was kind of a lackluster reception on the part of critics, takes on a new life. It takes on a new perspective. And we can even learn from this film, the messages conveyed in it, if we have eyes to see, how this can affect us in terms of geopolitics. It affects our everyday living because, we think we're Democrat or Republican. We think we're independent. We think this, that. And it's the essence of this geopolitical scheme that's a game. The game of nations, as Miles Copeland wrote. That really dupes the masses, right? And so, read in this way, then, the process individually for Bond is about then his overcoming of his conscience, the cremation of Bond's care, I guess we could say, the overcoming of the dialectic of good versus evil in Bond's own mind into a higher supposed synthesis of transcending such absolutist moral categories. This is the essence of the Gnostic scheme, the Masonic scheme. And as I said, in terms of geopolitics, those oligarchs that run things have similar proclivities. It's an esoteric, quote, great work wherein man is brought to perfection through scientific regimentation and technocratic world control. Sounds good, doesn't it? But it's not good, right? Because to do this, the world must be brought through successive alchemical stages, aeons, ages, and process of tension, strategy of tension, right? So that order out of chaos, that the omega point of techno transfiguration and transhumanism might come about, so they think. What is quantum? The word itself. Well, it's the minimum amount of any physical entity involved in an interaction, which again sounds like chemistry, and it's from alchemy that chemistry arose. So that concludes my analysis then of Quantum of Solace. So if you do get the impetus, take some time and go back and watch Quantum of Solace. You'll find out that you'll find out my alchemical thesis is accurate. And if you want more on this, go to jaysanalysis.com and search through my 007 Bond archive. There's quite a bit there. I don't have every Bond film or novel done yet, but I have a lot. I have quite a few of them. And also articles on geopolitics that tie into all this as well. So next we're going to move to Skyfall. And my article on Skyfall I titled From Skyfall to Spectre, 007 Secrets. And I wrote this December of last year, so right around the same time that I wrote my essay on Spectre. Not the film Spectre, but Spectre as the idea of an international mafia organization. And what we're going to talk about here is all the weird parallels and predictive programming incidents that were happening, especially at the end of last year, right before Spectre was announced as the next Bond film. And then we're going to talk about the film itself, the symbology used in it, what's going on there. Is it still alchemical? Yes, absolutely it is. So that's what we're going to see. But I want to remind you to check out j.talknetwork.com to get all the best supplements that you need. Make yourself fully what you could be. Right? Fulfill that potential that you have, the potentiality to actually be happy, healthy, fit, and so forth, thinking well. To think well also requires that the body be operating well, because we are a holistic entity. We're not just a mind, we're not just a body. We are a mind and a body, and both of them have to be healthy and working together. You can't do philosophy if you are a zombie. So this is a show about philosophy, and I want to help you be philosophers. I am your Hierophant to initiate you into the mysteries of philosophy. Of course, I'm being silly here, but you definitely should make the move towards living a healthy lifestyle. I did several years ago, and it's much better. I don't eat organic anymore. I don't eat GMOs anymore. I don't eat garbage, junk. Got rid of all that. No Cokes, none of that crap. The one vice that I do like is some form of tobacco or nicotine every now and then. So that's the one hold-on vice I still have. But if you vape, you can actually kind of knock the nicotine dosage down over time. So that's been helpful for me. But all that crap food, the so-called American diet, toss it all out. Get rid of all of it. No more Cheetos, no more crap, no more GMO food, no more candy, no more ding-dongs, all this. I mean, you walk into a grocery store, and it's like a lab. It's like being in a factory or something, like some sort of high toxicity factory. I can't even walk down the aisle where the cleaning products are, literally. When my body's been purged of all that junk, I walk down that aisle, it's like immediately get nauseous. So that tells me that this stuff is just highly, highly toxic. So if you want to move away from all that, you can start that journey at j.talknetwork.com. So we're going to talk Skyfall, and I thought it would be odd that as we talk about Skyfall, I wrote this analysis around the time of the announcement that the next film would be Spectre, because I also had written a piece about mafia, oligarchs, international criminal elites, the New World Order, and Spectre. So Spectre, is actually presented early on in the Bond stories, I think From Russia with Love, with this very feature, that they are an international group as opposed to SMERSH, which, as we've said before, SMERSH was actually a Russian counterintelligence organization. But Spectre has recruited from SMERSH, and they're international and thus able to play nation states off against one another. And that's what we saw Mr. Green doing in the previous Quantum of Solace installment. Transitioning out of the Soviet-affiliated SMERSH in the first Bond novel, Casino Royale, SMERSH becomes Spectre, which is a formidable terrorist organization from the ambiguous, quote, East, right, whatever that means. Right? Well, that's probably just propaganda, but I think it's telling that back, in the 50s and 60s, Fleming was already predicting this transition from the communist threat to the international terror threat. That's very fascinating. Very interesting. So if you had paid attention to Bond and predictive programming, you would know that oh, actually, East-West dialectic communism isn't going to be the threat of the future. It's going to be terror. And that's what happens in the Bond novels. Now, it was weird, too, right around this time last year, Sony claimed to have been hacked by North Korea. And which is completely preposterous, because North Korea is a fake CIA-run state, in my view. And I have arguments to that effect at Jay's Analysis, if you want to look that up. Just Google North Korea Jay's Analysis. But the Spectre script was leaked. Oh, whoa. And the hacker terrorists threatened a 9/11 style attack on movie theaters that played the James Franco and Seth Rogen spy comedy, The Interview. Now, everything about that is just completely preposterous. And if you go read, for example, Patrick Henningson's analysis at 21st Century Wire, which I thought was excellent, you will see that that was actually a Rand Corporation organized media PR psyop. Right? All completely. North Korea is just as much Hollywood as is The Interview. So let's get to Skyfall here. I suspect much more was at work then, given the plot of Skyfall surrounding a former MI6 operative named Mr. Silva, played by Javier Bardem. Listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer, jaysanalysis.com. We're looking at the movie Skyfall, which came out, I think, last year, 2014. And I said I think a lot more was at work with Skyfall than most people suspected, because it kind of had this, it gave the impression of being kind of a Die Hard style action movie with Bond tacked on top of it, but it was actually very well done. And we saw that Javier Bardem is playing this kind of Julian Assange-ish, Snowden-ish hacker, I guess, who's hell-bent on wreaking havoc on Dame Judi Dench's character M and all of Her Majesty's Secret Service. It is surely not coincidence that in Skyfall, Silva actually has the backdoor technology that brings to mind the Promise software, the octopus of Promise. That's even mentioned in old Wired magazine articles, which is that the NSA long ago had plans to build backdoor tech, backdoor into all the tech. It also brings to mind the recent hubbub involving the NSA and Snowden, which will also factor into Spectre. So it's kind of somewhat of a similar plot between these two. Now, with the recent news of all these news events in mind, then I think an analysis of Skyfall is appropriate here, especially with Spectre coming out, because, well, I'm struggling not to give away too much about Spectre, because it just premiered last weekend, so I'm assuming that probably a lot of listeners out there have not yet seen the film. So I'm going to try to walk a tight rope and not reveal too much, but so I'll just leave Spectre off for the moment. But in the reboot of Casino Royale, we saw Bond engaged in a bout with an associate of what we can assume will be Spectre ultimately, Le Chiffre. And then we saw him battling Mr. White and Mr. Green. And in my analysis of Casino Royale, if you heard it, I noted that the real associations can be made between Le Chiffre's organizations and Le Chiffre's organization, Quantum, and actual real cartels that run the world. I wrote, for example, in the beginning of Casino Royale, Bond is not after Smersh, but a wealthy, disfigured rogue who stuck out on his own and created a fifth column from Smersh. His name is Le Chiffre, and Le Chiffre translates to the cipher. This lets us know that more is at work here. Le Chiffre is, according to Bond writer Ian McIntyre, based on British Satanist occultist Aleister Crowley. Now, I said as well that, according to Bond writer Anthony Masters, it was actually Fleming who was responsible for the Rudolf Hess affair in Scotland and so forth. I won't rehearse too much of that, but you can find my pieces on that if you want to go deeper. While Le Chiffre funds an uprising, now this is the Casino Royale novel, if I recall. Excuse me. This is the Casino Royale, the film, where I want to backtrack a little bit and point this out because it's relevant. Le Chiffre funds an uprising, and he simultaneously makes a call to his broker where he puts put options on this plane that he's involved in, Skyfleet, this amorphous airline. And we get the impression that Le Chiffre plans a terror event that will benefit him monetarily from selling the put options. Now, in terms of esoteric analysis, this begins to look strikingly similar to the events prior to 9/11, that those in the know. Prior to the terror events of that day, there were numerous put options had been placed on certain United Airlines stocks. And this has resulted actually in quite a bit of speculation as to obvious prior knowledge. Right now, who exactly had the prior knowledge, we may not know, but pretty clearly there's prior knowledge if you're betting on United Airlines prior to this. And you can see from mainstream reports that I have up at Jay's Analysis that the establishment, who did they blame? Well, rogue traders. Yeah, right. Rogue traders affiliated with Al Qaeda. Yeah. Taliban and Al Qaeda are down there on the floor of the stock market, dressed like Jim Cramer. They're throwing little wads of paper around, screaming buy and sell after they say Allahu Akbar, right? And then we move to Quantum of Solace, where we talked about alchemy and the fire of Bond's forging, where he had to get rid of his attachments. Quantum, as I said, is the notion of matter, prima materia, and for Bond, it's the notion of being formed into the perfect assassin, where solace, a bit of solace, a quanta of solace, is never attained. Precisely because he's a programmed assassin, right? And the betrayal of Vesper Lind, which led to him coldly and callously claiming the bitch is dead, right? This shows that Bond is unremorseful. And this is crucial for understanding Fleming's works in general, as they are actually littered with esoteric images, as we've said many times. The Quantum of Solace was a Fleming short story about Bond. And as I said before, my allergies are going nuts, so you have to forgive me, listeners, as I endure the alchemical refining process of the changing of the seasons, which attacks my allergies with a refiner's fire. Quantum of Solace is a short story, and it's really not about anything particularly Bond. It's more of a humorous piece about marriage and cheating. And we saw this alchemical process going from Mr. White to Mr. Green and so forth. And it was laced with occult imagery. And Fleming's novels relate the dark side of mind control in at least 3 of the stories. Casino Royale, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, You Only Live Twice. In Casino, we learn that Bond is a programmed killer through his 00 status, which is actually real. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, we learn that Blofeld brainwashes young women under the auspices of treating allergies. I guess I need to actually probably go to the Blofeld clinic because my allergies are going crazy. I don't know if the Blofeld clinic actually works, though, because it might be good to send some mind control sex slave beta kitten Britney Spears babes over to my house, but I don't know if it actually cures allergies. ultimately, then, the plan of Blofeld was to attack England with a bioweapon, right? As well as vaccines, as Telly Savalas says in the film version. But in You Only Live Twice, Bond actually undergoes a blow to the head, which wipes out his mind and gives him amnesia. And for a while, he becomes a programmed Soviet agent. And after this, subsequently, Bond takes the number 777 after 007. So the mind control assassin theme is very much part of the Bond canon. Now we're talking still a little bit of quanta, and we saw that quantum was everywhere. Just like stuff is everywhere, right? Everything's made up of quantum matter. And we saw eyes everywhere. We saw swastikas everywhere. And this shows dialectics, right? And what Bond-relevant entity utilized the eye as a symbol? Do you know? It's the classic logo of British intelligence, MI5. It's a pyramid with an eye. You can't get any more blatant than that, right? So in Quantum of Solace, it's actually telling us that it is the Atlanticist establishment that is controlling all this. It's the city of London, right? Everybody's subservient to the ancient banking dynasties housed in Europe and the city of London. Now, Skyfall, as we said, Javier Bardem is the hacker, and he's hacking stuff and sending pop-ups to Judi Dench, and Judi Dench is stupidly clicking on pop-ups, which everybody knows not to click on pop-ups, especially if they're, skulls and naked women and stuff, because you're going to get a virus. But apparently the head of MI6 does not know that there's viruses, and so Judi Dench clicks on pop-ups, and the virus, gets into the system or whatever, and MI6 gets blown up by the blonde Javier Bardem, who looks like he's straight out of 1997, some sort of 90s hacker movie with Hot Pockets and Prodigy playing in the background. Actually, he's a little nicer dressed than that, but. So when we come to Skyfall, we see all these similar themes as we've seen before. Skyfall is about Bond's past, his family residence. That's what Skyfall is. It's this house out in Scotland. As well as in the intelligence operations in a new cyber virtual world. This Bond takes on the cyber world here. And as usual, the famous opening sequence reveals the esoteric elements of the plot to come. Right, all the famous Bond sequences that open up, right? And they're always different. But they generally explain through imagery, something that's going to be central to the plot, ultimately, right? And oftentimes they're esoteric. And we go from Bond's katabasis here. This is what's going to be important in Skyfall. And what is katabasis? What are you talking about, dude? Katabasis. Yes, katabasis. We are going to take a break, but in a minute you're going to learn something. I'm going to tell you what katabasis is. And you're going to come back and you're going to be blown away, because I bet you never thought about Skyfall in this way. But it's there. It's still kind of alchemical, but it's going to differ from what we saw in Quantum of Solace. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. We're talking about Skyfall, Bond's past, his residence, growing up, his new challenges of a new age of the cyber virtual reality, hacking. Right, as if this was new. I mean, this has been a plot in spy movies since the 90s. So I don't know why the film acts like this is some new reality, hacking, unless they're maybe preparing us for false flag cyber attacks that are coming or something. I don't know, but I told you we would discuss Bond's katabasis. What is katabasis? Well, this is a term from Greek literature, Greek history, where it's a descent. It's the hero's descent sometimes into the underworld, right? The main meaning given for katabasis is a going down, a military retreat, an allusion to the 10,000 Greeks under Xenophon, related by him in his Anabasis work. Now, the katabasis in Lit is primarily that descent to the underworld. In Greek mythology, we think of Orpheus, who enters the underworld and brings Eurydice back to the world of the living. Most katabases take place in a supernatural underworld, like Hades, Hell, Tartaros. In the Odyssey, right, there's a descent into the underworld. However, the descent can also be seen in the notion of Lazarus, right? Lazarus' death and his resurrection, or Christ and his descent into Hades and resurrection as well. It also happens in Virgil's Aeneid. And as I said before, you'll have to forgive me, my allergies are quite fiery at this juncture in the change of seasons. So, we talked about swastikas in Quantum, and swastikas are present in Skyfall as well. And for example, we talked about GoldenEye, I believe last time, where the opening sequence included scantily clad hotties tearing down Soviet statues. But what's actually at work in the opening sequence, it was a amazing presentation of dialectics, where the I was on both sides of the Cold War dialectic, capitalism, communism. The I in Quantum was on both sides of the dialectic of left-wing revolutionaries and right-wing military junta dictators. And it's also why Bond receives the Order of Lenin in A View to a Kill, the 1985 Bond film. Now, this seeming contradiction is made coherent when we understood Green and his quantum organization, right? In Skyfall, however, we're entering Bond's subconscious yet again, sinking with him into the abyss of death as Bond is accidentally shot by Moneypenny in a botched operation to retrieve the hard drive that contains the list of MI6 agents embedded with NATO. Now, so this is Bond's katabasis, right? And in that beginning sequence, as Bond sinks to the floor of the bed of waterbed, we notice that he's pulled into a black hole in the ocean's floor, and this begins that artistic opening scene of what we see in all the Bond films, the iconic opening credits of Bond, where the theme song plays. It was Adele that did the theme song for Skyfall, and so as Bond sinks to the floor, we see a red skull that appears, and this then leads to Bond blowing away a bunch of shadow selves of himself. The shots break the glass images, and this indicates Bond's own fractured psyche of past trauma due to his training, the numerous instances of torture, being an orphan. And then we see images of pillars that signify the deepest recesses and foundations of Bond's archetypal subconscious. The shadow self then appears in the figure of Bond's nemesis, Mr. Silva, who, like Bond, is betrayed by M. Bond will be betrayed in this film, right? Because M gave the order to shoot, even if it's going to hit Bond. Bond is thus tempted to leave his Secret Service work because of past issues with his own disfigured archetypes of mother and father. Because, as I said, he is an orphan. M thus becomes his mother figure, and numerous times in the film, the association of M with the Queen Mother, are made, indicating archetypes. Bond will be tempted to deny his loyal, patriotic fervor, embodied in the figure of Silva, the traitor. As Bond sinks deeper and deeper in the title sequence, we see the Death's Head image emerge. Fiery torture, a likely reference to his torture at the hands of Le Chiffre, and Chinese fire dragons. The presentation of the dragon within the deep, or the Leviathan, is interesting. Tiamat. As Bond will venture eastward in the film to Macau and interact with the gangsters there involved in the sex trade, sex slaves, white slavery, and they work for Silva. The sequence then ends with the camera entering Bond's left eye, or the left-handed path, where we will see more of the traumatic circumstances that have made 007 into the killing machine that he is. Now, I'm sure readers are aware that the plot is about MI6 being hacked by Silva and releasing the names, as we said, of MI6 agents progressively over time. I think he's loading them up to YouTube. This kind of mirrors the supposed event of Richard Tomlinson, the actual supposed purported defector from MI6, who did this on YouTube, I think. Is Silva a fictional version of a kind of Tomlinson-Assange hybrid? Now, this is recounted in Richard Tomlinson's book, The Big Breach, and reportedly he leaked names online. Perhaps the idea of combining the two so-called villains of MI6 into a cyber terror package was fitting. Now, of course, I don't know about Tomlinson's case, but I mean, I've read the book. I can't question his motives because I don't know. But in the case of Assange, I'm very much a skeptic, as I am with Snowden. I'm not sure these are real opponents of the system. And I've laid out my thesis as to why that is in many other talks and articles. So the intelligence agencies then have played up this so-called threat of cyber terror for years, right? And the cyber terror. And they argue that, the total control and surveillance of the web is the only way to defeat all of these terrorists that are everywhere out there. And in Skyfall, we even have Silva, right, as the mastermind of an actual 7/7 style underground bombing, right? Silva bombs the underground. Well, it sounds like 7/7. Simultaneous with his subway bombing, M is at a government hearing on human intelligence as old-fashioned. Get rid of it. We don't need that anymore. We got the internet. And in response, M reads a Tennyson poem about England still being an empire, but with new enemies. The new enemies are everyone. They're everywhere. They're hidden terrorists everywhere because they hate our way of life. Well, come on. Give me a fucking break. I mean, as if England was actually working to maintain its cultural, traditional heritage. England is completely overrun with immigration and is no longer anything like what it used to be, as the my friends I have that live there will tell me that. You walk down the street and it's not like it used to be 100 years ago. So England, and that's that is of course the cost of empire. That's what happens when you build an empire. You lose what was your organic heritage, because empires become corrupt and crumble. And empires have to create enemies. They have to create terrorists. They create controlled opposition by the very fact of being an empire. That's what they do. So naturally, a former MI6 agent is responsible for the 7/7 style event in the film narrative. Well, in real life, it was actually whatever we can believe about the 7/7 event. It was actually an MI6 agent, and you can find this news article, this news piece, still on YouTube. The 7/7 London bomber was an MI6 agent. So the new enemies are everywhere, or are no one and everyone, hidden terrorists everywhere. As Fleming said decades before, this would be the new transition. When we came out of the Cold War, we would go into the War on Terror. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. We're talking Skyfall, and I was telling you that the war on poverty, the war on terror, the war on drugs, these are think tank manufactured wars. They're branded, marketed, quote, wars. They're not real wars. They're social engineering marketing tools to sell ideas and to sell corporate policies in foreign countries and domestically. Meanwhile, the government runs the drugs while they wage the war on drugs. The war on drugs is the war on any cartel that might be in competition with daddy government. That's what the war on drugs is. So, but back to Bond. We were talking about Bond's resurrection. Bond is mortally, vitally wounded and resurrected to return to duty. But we're supposed to get the impression that Bond's old. He's getting old. He can't fire his gun as well. And he's about to be outmoded and outdated and replaced with just NSA style stuff. And there's all this reminiscing nostalgia in this film about the old ways of British intelligence, and we're being replaced with computers now and cyber tracking, and isn't it sad or whatever. It's Bond's an old outdated ship. He's like an old Aston Martin. He's an old Walther PPK. I mean, I guess if you bought into the Cold War, if you bought into all this stuff, you might be nostalgic about it. But I mean, is the rest of the populace really nostalgic about it? People seem pretty apathetic. I mean, I don't know who's really emotionally moved by this, but the film seems to take itself seriously in that way, which is a little bit preposterous. But I guess for a retard public, maybe. So the consistent theme of the old versus the new, right, is throughout this. Fans are given constant references to classic Bond guns, the Aston Martin, Bond's new IT nerd, Quartermaster Q, right? They have their grappling battles with the realities of modern cyber espionage, supplanting the old methods of human intelligence and assassinations. Is Bond washed up? Is the whole question of this movie. And thus we must go to Bond's origins and his childhood trauma to resolve the issues of his dark past. Typical plot, typical archetypal stuff. But well done, well executed. So most of the previous is going to be kind of irrelevant, I think, to the ultimate message of the film, which is that terrorists are everywhere. Right, that's the most important geopolitical message from this. That the intelligence agencies keep failing. We keep failing. But we need more funding to be protected from people like Richard Tomlinson or Aswad or Snowden or Bin Laden or Assange. More funding, more surveillance, more money, more. Then we'll stop the terrorists. And the terrorists are always run by the West, or it's just staged. It's just fake, right? So it's just a big scam, a big Ponzi scheme, a big money pyramid scheme, a big money trick, confidence men, and so forth. The equation is, quite a cash cow. More funding plus more surveillance equals more terror, actually, right? So the more these agencies grow, the more terror we get, the more drills we get, the more blah, 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 and then they have to justify their existence. So we got to have a new terror event, right? Well, that justifies all the big build-up. The eternal war on terror, right, that we saw in Fleming's classic novels, predicted and planned to replace this Soviet threat, right? The Cold War allowed then for the installation of this global surveillance grid, and this is an argument I've made many times. That's kind of what the Cold War was for, was to build up the big global surveillance grid. And the script is then flipped on the populace, where we all become the potential terrorists, right? It's no longer Soviets. It's no longer Bin Laden. It's everybody in the domestic population is now the potential Bin Laden. Only Skynet can save us from this by watching everything that we do to keep us safe. Now, these classic scams, they never fail to work. which is, of course, because the mindless public just never catches on to the same lies over and over and over. The government just lies constantly, but nobody seems to figure that out. Now, from an esoteric perspective, all the hidden elements are that are contained, I think, in the opening sequence just unfold in the rest of the film. Bond's journey eastward is parallel to his descent into the abyss and death at the beginning. His trip to Macau, has him facing the dragon of the East, the demonic Mr. Silva. Well, who set up all the drug opium networks in Macau and in China? Well, the British intelligence did. The British East India Company did, right? They ran all of that, right? So give me a break here. Come on. Now, this is exemplified in his boat ride into the dragon's mouth. When this scene when Bond is entering Silva's casino in Macau. Now, in Casino Royale, Bond faced Le Chiffre, a Western demon in a casino. And now he faces a demon of the East. And then he fights that Gila monster, right? Silva is a master of false flags, we learn, having staged a chemical leak on a Chinese island and caused its inhabitants to flee, enabling Silva to take up residence for his operations. Now, interestingly, there was no chemical leak. It was just made up. Fake news, crisis actors, starring Mr. Silva. Now, just like the underground bombing, Silva stages events, but remember, the film places all of his dastardly work on the shoulders of a former intelligence agent. Oh, you see, he's not working with the system. He's the bad guy now. He's a rogue. It's always the rogue. It's always that bad apple, the rogue who gets away. It's never corrupt establishment elites. Well, every now and then it is, but rarely. Quantum did allow for this, right? But very rarely does anyone dare to question the mainstream version of the attacks, right? For fear of being labeled insensitive and, you don't care about the victims, and what about all these school shootings, and how dare you question the mainstream story, even though there's a bunch of actors involved and it's all made up and doesn't make sense. Oh, how dare you question that? You don't have patriotism, you hate people, you want to kill people with guns. Now, given the immensity of the perpetual lies of the Western establishment, especially since 9/11, does anyone really believe the propaganda message of Skyfall? I mean, on a film level, it's a good film, but on a propaganda level, come on. This is just ridiculous, right? It's just propping up this old narrative that, is just complete baloney, that Bin Laden did 9/11 and there's all these terrorists out there and they hate us because they have psychological issues and they hate our freedoms and support the troops, right? If London was really worried about terror, then why would they be a hub for radical Islam? Come on. London's called Londonistan because it's so full of Islamic believers, right? Now, presumably, if you were worried about terrorists, you would be worried about Al-Qaeda and Islam, right? Because supposedly these are real entities that are going to, and ISIS is going to do, damage to the West at any moment. Oh, there's all these ISIS that are invading America, which is not true. It's all made up because ISIS videos are fake. Now, to bring this full circle, it's Bond's death and resurrection that is the reboot of the series, right? So we know from the supposed leak of the new Spectre script, this was at the time, this is a year ago, right, when they supposedly Spectre script was leaked by hackers from North Korea, which is, try not to laugh at that. So the third act was up for grabs, right? Will it be Blofeld, right? I'm not going to tell you. Kissy Suzuki. In any case, the leaks that we saw a year ago about this were a staged PR event. And other mega tech companies have done such actions in the past. So nothing new here, nothing new to see. Now that Spectre is out, it's interesting to look back on the year ago leak of Spectre, which was just marketing and PR. And then who's the terrorist in this story? North Korea, the infamous North Korean terror state, which is completely fake. Completely staged, fake state run by the CIA. I guess what I'd like to leave with on this question of Skyfall is that there was a Walt Disney propaganda piece back in, I don't know, the 50s, I think. It's a World War II or I guess it would be the 40s, 40s somewhere. It's a World War II propaganda film by the Disney company about, I guess, Nazis and World War II. So it's Chicken Little, right? The sky is falling. Because it's fear is what this propaganda piece was about. And Skyfall is interesting because that's what Skyfall is about. It's about telling you that you need to be afraid of all these terrorists, and we can't just rely on cyber espionage and counter-espionage. Oh, we got to have all these human domestic agents who spy too, or else the terrorists will get us and they'll hack everything. This is the end. Hold your breath and count to 10. I've drowned and dreamt this moment. Let the sky fall. When it crumbles, we will stand tall and face it all at Skyfall. So, really, it's about the furtherance of the surveillance NSA state, and that's going to be a little bit of a change when we get to Spectre, because Bond will kind of play a anti-establishment role again here. And the villain in the film will kind of, it's hard to explain. It's like Javier Bardem in Skyfall was doing the same thing as the villain in Spectre, and how it was about Bond returning to his roots and getting over some of his past drama, letting the past go away, let it die, let it rest. And then I was talking about how the plot of Silva, Javier Bardem, being this backdoor Promis NSA type hacker guy, it's kind of like the same plot of Spectre. So, and Spectre does have the establishment as the bad guy, I have to say. I'm trying not to give too much away, but you'll see when you see the film, if you haven't seen it yet, what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to ruin it for you because I'm going to give it a few more days before I do a Spectre analysis. We will analyze Spectre because there was a good bit to talk about in that film. But I wrote another piece, I think, that's germane here that I mentioned earlier. The Establishment Shadow Government is Spectre. I wrote this a year ago. And I was thinking about, have you ever heard of this band of people who rob jewelry stores called the Pink Panthers? Now, the famed Pink Panther diamond ring has garnered attention, of course, but I was reminded of something out of a Bond novel when I was thinking about the Pink Panthers, this diamond gang. Now, judging by the 2D news narrative, right, we're expected to believe that this ring of some 200 crooks operates under unknown leaders plotting in the dark, as noble authorities and intelligence officials feverishly work around the clock to apprehend the fiends, right? Now, Diamonds Are Forever might be appropriate here because in the 1958 Fleming novel Dr. No, I was going to say Diamonds Are Forever might sound appropriate, but it's actually Dr. No, the 58 novel, where No makes an equally prescient and insightful statement about black markets and their fierce master, the shadow government. I'm going to read a quote from Dr. No. Mr. Bond, power is sovereignty. Clausewitz's first principle was to have a secure base. From there one proceeds to freedom of action. Together that is sovereignty. I have secured these things and much beside. No one else in the world possesses them to the same degree as I do. They cannot have them. The world, you see, is too public. These things can only be secured in privacy. You talk to me of kings and presidents. How much power do they possess? As much as their people will allow them. Now, who in the world has the power of life and death over his people? Now that Stalin is dead, can you give a name any other than myself? Now, how do I possess this power and sovereignty, Bond? through privacy, through the fact that nobody knows. That is an excellent summation of Spectre. What does Spectre stand for? Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. Spectre. Now, I've noted many times the principle of psychological warfare employed by Fleming in the Bond novels that proved tremendously effective to project every dark, secret, nefarious operation of your side, what you're engaged in, onto your competition, the enemy. Now, be sure to make your enemy out to be a disfigured hybrid mulatto for good measure, right? Now, Dr. No was Chinese and German mixed, right, racially. Now, in this story, Dr. No has established his secret base of operations on a secretive island off the coast of Jamaica, where, predictably, his underground mountain fortress, with its secret high-tech radar and surveillance equipment that he got from Moscow, of course, remotely commandeers U.S. missiles. Dr. No's cover is the nasty business of farming guano, or bird dung, for fertilizer. So with all the usual Fleming tropes, Dr. No emerges in the narrative as an exemplary figure of the sexually repressed daddy issues villain, right, with connections to international crime, espionage, Soviets, money laundering, etc. No is an exemplary figure of the shadow government, and the shadow government is normative in our day, right? As this is how the world really is run. But is it really rogue people out there like Dr. No, like Blofeld, rogues like... No, it's not. That's the thing. It's not rogues like Silva, right? It takes a lot of power, a lot of capital, a lot of connections to be able to do these kinds of things, and you can't do these kinds of things unless you are very wealthy or have access to a lot of liquid cash. And the people that have lots of access to lots of liquid cash are people who are tied into the establishment and the system. They're not rogues. Now, in reality then, right, the hierarchical pyramid of global government is not a series of goodly nation states that seek to protect the free world from the dastardly Manichaean dialectical manifestations of evil, but rather is itself a large interlocking system of crime syndicates. That's my point. The world government that already exists, it's not coming after some FEMA camp, the martial law scenario. The world government's already here. The world monetary system's already here, right? It's called Bretton Woods, right? It happened after World War II. All right. It already exists. It's a hidden rulership by banks and oligarchs. Now, a certain level of competition does exist and is tolerated. These oligarchical Dr. No's are not the denizens of secret Soviet underground layers, but Bilderberg attendees, banking magnates. It is my thesis that whatever you see Dr. No or Blofeld or Schmerz or Spectre up to, this is actually what the establishment's doing. That's the whole thing. That's the key. So the appellation of rogue nation, rogue villain, rogue agent is really a media propaganda psyop term for some double agent that's controlled, or completely a fictional character, right? A terrorist, for whatever crime syndicate that happens to be in vogue. North Koreans, right? Al-Qaeda, ISIS. But is this really the case? I mean, do we have evidence of this from any actual source? Is this just me speculating from movies? Did I watch too many Bond movies in a row? No. All right. Evidence from numerous investigative journalists, right? There was plenty of books on this. Analysts, historians, answers that are in the affirmative or profuse. In the classic Tragedy and Hope by Dr. Carroll Quigley, we have a great quote about the government and monopolistic money cartels, right, doing things in this very way. I'm going to read a brief quote here. Naturally, the influence of bankers over governments during the age of finance capitalism from 1850 to 1931 was not something about which anyone freely talked. but it had been admitted frequently enough by those on the inside, especially in England. In 1852, Gladstone, Chancellor of the Exchequer, declared, "The hinge of the whole situation was this: the government itself was not to be a substantive power in matters of finance, but was to leave the money power supreme and unquestioned." On September 26, 1921, the Financial Times wrote, "Half a dozen men at the top of the 5 big banks can upset the whole fabric of government finance by refraining from renewing treasury bills." So they could control all of the Western financial system in 1921. In 1924, Sir Drummond Fraser, Vice President of the Institute of Bankers, said, "The Governor of the Bank of England must be the autocrat who dictates the terms upon which government can obtain borrowed money." Oh, the world government's coming. They're going to set up a world government. There's going to be UN troops on the streets. What are we going to do? The world government's already here, Dumbo. The bankers set it up 150 years ago. Our political leaders are nothing more than puppets, then, of this same monopolistic cartel. But the point to grasp here that concerns altering one's perception of the establishment as the authoritative white hat good guy fighting the international black hats, right, of diamond heists and terrorist bases that are underground, is that the establishment itself is the ruling mafia. That's the key, right? The control of black markets is key to understanding what is meant by shadow government. Their goal is global government and the control of all aspects of life. And unfortunately, some aspects of life in this world involve black markets, right? So there's a good portion of the U.S. economy, a good, big, sizable portion of the U.S. economy that is actually funded by drug money and by financial scams. So support the troops, support the troops, support the troops, we gotta support the troops. Or because the troops are the shock troops of Spectre. Oops, you didn't know that, because Spectre hides behind the flag. We often speak of the New World Order taking over governments or conspiring to manipulate some event or subvert some institution. But the lens through which to grasp its true inner workings is the mafia crime syndicate model, the cartel model. That's how to understand the New World Order. It's the best model because they run the crime rackets. Investigative journalist Michael Ruppert wrote a good book some years ago called Crossing the Rubicon. And I won't, I don't agree with everything Ruppert says in that book, but it's worth reading. There's a lot of great facts that you can dig out of there. He ended up, I think, kind of in a weird place before he passed away. And he promoted quite a few questionable things like peak oil, but there are a lot of details in that book. So I would recommend that, if you're looking for a good book on this topic, read Crossing the Rubicon, and he'll talk about all the black market angle of all this. And that's how to understand Spectre, and that's how to understand Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. So next time we'll talk Spectre, but this has been Esoteric Hollywood, and I've been your host, Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. Thank you.